This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. The Browns got rich people problems. Here's what I mean by that. We spend so much time trying to figure out everything that's good and bad with the team. And recently, we've been focusing more on some of the holes that the Cleveland Browns have. And when you do that, it's easy to wrap yourself up into that flaw. Talk about that flaw so much that all you can see is the one flaw on the roster. And that one flaw can make you think of every worst case scenario that can happen because of that one flaw existing. And then you convince yourself that the team is going to stink because of that one flaw. If you're a Baltimore Ravens fan, right? The Baltimore Ravens were one of the best teams in the NFL last year. They made it to the conference championship. If you're a Baltimore Raven fan, it's real easy to do that about the wide receiver position. They've been doing that to themselves over the last few years. People have done that to the Baltimore Ravens over the last few years, where you can look at that wide receiver room. It's not good enough. They're worse than they were last year. And you can convince yourself, if you look through the very narrow lens of just that one flaw and how that one flaw is going to affect the Baltimore Ravens, you can convince yourself that the Ravens aren't going to be good. People are doing this with the Pittsburgh Steelers right now. I had a conversation with Kobe on this on Q and Kobe, where Kobe was convinced the Steelers might stink this year, and I had to remind him they got a really good defense. But if you just look at the Steelers' offense, and let's be honest, it looks the same as it's been the last 3 years. It wasn't good. Hasn't been good since like 2018, since the days of Bell and Antonio Brown and Ben Roethlisberger. Like, that's the last time the Steelers' offense has been good. It looks the same as it's been the last few years. It looks bad. The offensive line doesn't look great. The Steelers' offensive line hasn't been great for a long time. The running game looks okay. The Steelers' running game has been okay for a while. And the quarterback play looks awful. And their quarterback play has been bad for a while now. Like, even the last few years of Ben weren't great years of quarterback play. So it's easy to convince yourself when you just watch the Steelers' offense, oh, they're going to stink this year. They're going to be bad. But they're not. They're going to be a 500 team. They're going to be just as good as they were last year. They're not going to be any better, but they're going to be just as good as they were last year. More than likely. Bad quarterback play, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields aside, they're going to be the same team they've always been because they have that defense. But when you wrap yourself up into the issues they have on offense, boy, you can convince yourself that that's going to be a team that's going to win 4 games. Same thing can be said for the Kansas City Chiefs, right? They got no wide receivers. Their offensive line was dookie last year. Like, you could have convinced yourself that this is the year, and people did convince themselves that this was the year that the Kansas City Chiefs were going to stink. Even though they had Pat Mahomes, we were all aware that Pat Mahomes was Pat Mahomes at this point, right? Like, it's not like it caught us by surprise that Pat was good. We knew they had Pat. We saw what they had during the regular season, and a lot of us felt like they stunk. Because you got wrapped up in all their issues. We didn't talk about the fact they got one of the best defenses in the NFL. It's easy to convince yourself of doomsday scenarios when you're only looking at the doom, right? When you're only looking at the worst case scenarios of the worst case scenarios of the worst case scenarios. If this thing goes wrong and that thing goes wrong and this thing goes wrong, it's going to be real bad. Yeah, if 3 things go wrong in the exact same spot, it's probably going to be bad. And this is why I say the Browns got a rich people problem. The reason the term rich people problems exists is because rich folk got problems. Like anybody else, rich folk got problems. Sometimes those problems can be very real. Sometimes those problems can be very rich people oriented, right? Like, your Bentley is not working, so you have to drive your Toyota. Like, oh, okay, that's a true rich person problem. Like, nobody cares. Or sometimes it might be because you're actually going through something. And we say rich people problems because Ultimately, you have the resources at hand to be able to address whatever problem is going to be. Ultimately, you have enough financial security that if you do deal with the issue, you will be okay. Your life won't be financially ruined. You won't end up homeless like so many do when they run into one or two snags in the system. The Browns have rich people problems. Yeah, their backup offensive tackle is not great. They need to upgrade a backup offensive tackle. But we're talking about backup offensive tackle. We've had arguments about the third string quarterback on this team. Should it be Tyler Huntley? Should it be DTR? Third string quarterback. We're arguing about this. One of the things that we talk is the run game going to be good without Nick Chubb? Now, if Nick Chubb were gone and not coming back and on a different team, that'd be a different conversation. But we're talking about, can this team survive for maybe 4 weeks while Nick Chubb is injured? And then you get Nick Chubb back? It's rich people problems. It's not normal people problems. The Browns have clearly, obviously, have rich people problems. We're wondering if Deshaun Watson, who's under 30, who still looks as athletic as he's ever been, still capable of doing all the athletic stuff that he's been. It's not a situation like Russell Wilson where he's over 30 and looks like he does not have the same prerequisite athletic ability that allows him to play his game. No, it's not the case with Deshaun Watson. They're just wondering if he can stay healthy and play well. He's under 30. There's a good chance he can stay healthy and play well. Every team that made the conference championship game last year had issues. It's important to acknowledge that, right? We tend to think in order for the Browns to be Super Bowl contenders, in order for the Browns to reach their goals, the roster, the team, you must feel great about every position, right? Every position must be one of the best in the NFL. Every player must be one of the best in the NFL for you to get there, but that's just simply not true. That's never true. You're never going to walk on to an NFL season with a Team USA roster for your football team. That's just not possible. Look at the 4 teams that were in the conference championship last year. Detroit had a quarterback that a lot of people aren't sold on in Jared Goff. Dan Campbell and his play philosophy is something that drives people crazy. The Detroit Lions had issues all up and down that roster. The Detroit Lions weren't predicted to be a conference championship team because of the issues they have on the roster. But they figured out a way to figure it out. San Francisco 49ers had a quarterback most people aren't sold on to this day. Whenever I say nice things about Brock Purdy, I get a ton of comments talking about how I'm drinking the juice, how he's not that good. A lot of people still aren't sold on Brock Purdy. You're relying on 2 very injury-prone players in Deebo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey. And those players did get injured throughout the course of the season. Underwhelming year for Nick Bosa as well. Like, you convince yourself that the 49ers were going to stink. They lost to PJ Walker last year. They lost to the Cincinnati Bengals. You could have convinced yourself at some point during the year, this 49ers is going to stink, man. Look at all these problems. Look at who they're relying on. Every team got issues. We talked about Baltimore. They don't have wide receivers. Another thing Baltimore had was a very suspicious offensive line. Right, Ronnie Stanley is not what he used to be, so much so to the point where they were rotating him in and out. Like a defensive lineman, they were rotating Ronnie Stanley in and out with Daniel Falele. It's not even that good. The interior of that offensive line got old. Other tackle positions got hurt. You convince yourself that, oh man, this Ravens team, they're not going to be that good. Look at these issues, right? Marlon Humphrey, shell of himself last year. They didn't stink, though. They got through those problems. They dealt with the problems. Kansas City, patchwork offensive line, no wide receivers. That offensive line, they had one of the most penalized tackles, 2 of the most penalized tackles per play. People are concerned because the Browns don't look perfect. They can see some cracks in the exterior of the Cleveland Browns roster. That's okay. The Browns were never going to be perfect. The roster was never sold to you as perfect. It's very good. And I think one of the things we've lost sight of, because we just haven't seen these players play all preseason, is that the Browns, they have security. They have Myles Garrett. They're going to be okay. They have Denzel Ward. They're going to be okay. They have Grant Delpit. They're going to be okay, right? They have J.O.K. They have multiple playmakers, a lot of dudes. Martin Emerson. You look at the offensive side of the ball. Even if all this complaining we're doing about the offensive line, all of the pointing out that I've done about Joe Bitonio not being what he was, he's still pretty good. Wyatt Teller, still better than most guards. Ethan Posick, better than most centers. Jed Wills, better than most tackles. Not better than all tackles, better than most tackles. And DeJuan Jones, Jack Conklin, whoever you want to play there, better than most tackles. The Browns' offensive line is no longer going to be elite. No longer going to be one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. No longer going to be a thing that they can rest their hat on as the identity of the team anymore. It hasn't been that way in a couple of years, quite frankly. But that doesn't mean the offensive line is going to magically be a disaster. It's just not going to be as good as you remember. You're going to deal with issues that stem from the offensive line. There are going to be games where teams are going to be able to get to the Browns quarterback. It's going to be frustrating. They're going to have to overcome that. It was never going to be a cakewalk for this Browns team. And I think it being revealed to people that it's not going to be a cakewalk is something that has made people feel like it's going to be doom and gloom. It is not. Yes, the Browns have problems, but let's put those problems in context. They are not problems that are going to end your season. They're not problems that are going to make it so you can't compete. This team went through 5 quarterbacks last year, and we're down to Garyon Christian and James Hudson, and they still won 11 games. Now, granted, the schedule's not going to be as light as it was last year. You're probably not going to get as lucky with quarterback play that you're playing at home and all of that. Yeah, I get it. I think we're overrating how much of a difference that makes. It's not like the Browns are going from playing in the MAC to the Big Ten or the SEC or something like that. And the way people talk about it, you would think we going from playing Akron to Pittsburgh. Like, it makes no sense how people talk about it. You're still in the AFC North last year. You still had a very difficult schedule. You're going to have a difficult schedule this year. It's important that you talk about the problems that the team has. I know there's some people who would rather just never talk about anything wrong about the Cleveland Browns or say anything that's not extremely positive about the Cleveland Browns. But that's not honest. What is important is that you can hear the criticisms of the team and not dismiss them, but also not take them so deeply that you're running with the worst possible conclusion that could come from those issues existing. There's a balance here, right? You hear some things about the team. Okay, the offensive line, not what it used to be. You're going to have to adjust to that. And it just paints the picture of what that team is. And you shouldn't be rushing to paint a picture of just all sunshine and rainbows and all doom and gloom. It's got to take the information for what it is. Understand that that's going to be part of it. Understand that the team was never going to be perfect, and no team ever is. And every team that's won a championship ever before has stuff wrong with it. Every Super Bowl contender, you could point out something that people weren't sold on, that people did not think could win the championship with, because you had this position group that's good. Like, take Pat Mahomes out the picture and the wide receivers that he didn't have last year out the picture. Looking at that offensive line, you could tell yourself you can't win a championship with the offensive line like the Kansas City Chiefs had last year. You got Donovan Smith at the last legs of his career. You got a right tackle who can't stop jumping off sides. I mean, not jumping off sides, false starting. How can you win a championship with that? Well, they did. Teams find ways to win championships with problems all the time. Got to figure it out. The Browns are going to have to figure it out. The offensive line is not going to be the best thing about this team anymore. Got to figure it out. How are they going to win games now in spite of that? That doesn't mean that they're going to stink. That doesn't mean that they're guaranteed success. But what it does mean is that they have something they need to overcome. And you're going to have a ton of hurdles this year. Every team does. If the Browns want to get to their championship, they want to be a championship contender, they're going to have to clear those hurdles. Acknowledging that the hurdles exist, though, that does not mean that you think the team's going to suck. And sometimes I feel like we are not confused, but we are tricked into thinking that pointing the hurdles out means that you have to be overtly negative about the fact that those hurdles exist. I think you could be positive. I think you could be optimistic, but still be realistic enough to point out the fact that those hurdles exist. That's what I'm all about. I know people tag me as Mr. Optimistic. Sometimes if I'm pointing out stuff that's not great, people get mad at me for being too pessimistic. But in reality, I am optimistic, but I'm realistic about what's ahead. I think the Browns can clear these hurdles, but I'm not going to lie to you and tell you these hurdles don't exist. I'm not going to blindfold you and just tell you to run. I'm going to let you know what's in front of you and what the Browns have to clear. And I'm going to let you know if I think the Browns can realistically clear those hurdles. Right now, I think they can. I think they can clear the hurdle of not having the greatest running game behind Nick Chubb. I think they can clear the hurdle of not having the greatest backup left tackle. I think they can clear those hurdles right now. If it changes, I'll let you know. But the hurdles existing is not licensed to be doom and gloom about the team's future. Which brings me back to the title of this video. The Browns have rich people problems, and not all rich people problems are superficial, right? Like the example I mentioned at the beginning, where your super nice car is available. So you just gotta drive your kind of nice car. No, like sometimes rich people have real problems. Problems that would bankrupt me or you or somebody else who does not have the financial standing of that rich person. But ultimately, it's a rich person problem for them because they have enough financial security, enough support, enough connections to be able to clear the hurdles that are ahead of them. Same is true with the Browns. The Browns have problems. And maybe on a worse team that doesn't have the same complement of players that the Cleveland Browns have, these problems could bankrupt those teams. But it's not necessarily true for this team because they have a wealth of resources available to them and a wealth of star players available to them that most other teams don't. That is my point. That is why I say the Browns have rich people problems. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.